Okay, you're introducing me, so I shouldn't start. But I should introduce Morgen. Morgen Rochard is a financial planner and my wife and a Bitcoiner. She's written one book about financial planning, a bestseller on Amazon, Quick Start Guide to Personal Finance. It's probably the only financial planning book out there that actually has a balanced take on Bitcoin. So now I'll let her introduce me.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I should start this with welcome to Bitcoin for Advisors. My name is Morgen Rochard. This is my
She's referring to our podcast.
Yeah.
Clarify for folks. Oh, we got
chairs.
Oh,
we have chairs now.
All right.
Okay.
Free chairs.
This is my husband, Pierre Rochard. Can y'all over there see us? Should we come up?
Yeah, let's pull
Pull up, baby, this side. Okay. My husband, Pierre Rochard. He's been working in Bitcoin either for a company or just helping out the community since 2012. So an OG for sure. But he is probably best known for, is this one better? Can you hear me better? Oh, yeah. He's probably best known for his viral video where he proved to the world that Bitcoin miners do not emit CO2. In addition to that, he is the VP of Research at Riot Platforms, where he has been conducting very thorough research on Bitcoin transactions and mining, and also energy related to Bitcoin. And so it's a pleasure to have you here with me.
Yeah, thank you. I had some slides ready for energy and Bitcoin, but I accidentally locked myself out of them last night, and that was a bit of a mistake on my part. But, you know, I think it gives us an opportunity to sit down, do more of an interactive Q&A back and forth, just like the podcast we co-host, Bitcoin for Advisors. Subscribe, give it 5 stars on iTunes. And that way we could just have a free-flowing conversation.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. So we wanted to start with how to talk about Bitcoin with your spouse, because we get this a lot from Bitcoiners. And they're often wondering, how do I orange pill my spouse? How do I make
or they're wondering, how do I keep my involvement with Bitcoin secret and, you know, take money from our 401k without her noticing to put it into Bitcoin? You know, I've got advice on how to do that.
For 10 years, so, you know. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Don't do that. We don't do that. Yeah. But we often get it because people think, oh, Morgan's orange pilled. How did Pierre do it? Can you give us tips?
I didn't really have to put a lot of effort into orange pilling Morgan. I think it was actually kind of, you orange pilled yourself. You were like reading things that were laying around on my desk, which I don't know. But in any case, then you started explaining Bitcoin to me. Which was kind of the tables turning.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I think it does start with a basic knowledge of Austrian economics. It does help for sure to be orange pilled very quickly. But in lieu of that, if your spouse is not reading Murray Rothbard and Mises and Hoppe and all the greats, what should you do to help your spouse?
Okay. Well, you tell them that it's going to go up.
Yeah. And you tell them, I'll thank you, you'll thank me later. Yeah, you'll thank me later is a good one. And no, really, seriously though, the first thing you should do is actually listen to the spouse who is not on board. So I often see this in my practice. I have a financial planning firm where we do deal with Bitcoin couples. And usually if the wife's not on board, it's because she's been talked at so much about Bitcoin. It's literally like, here's the wife and here's Bitcoin. And it's like, you know, and she's had it so much and she hasn't actually been listened to that she just tunes it out. And she's not interested. And so it doesn't matter the dissertation you've written on Bitcoin or how many hours you've been down the rabbit hole or how many Stefan Livera podcasts you want her to listen to. She's just not going to hear you if you don't hear her. So I would say that's a good place to start.
What do you think about playing Guy Swan audiobooks at bedtime? That way the husband doesn't even have to talk. A guy can just talk to your wife.
Yeah, it's a very intimate discussion with Guy, especially.
Pillow Talk with Guy.
Yeah, Pillow Talk with Guy. It's your next audio series, Guy. We're giving you product ideas here. That might not work. Yeah, that might not work. But if you put on Bitcoin for Advisors, our podcast, that might work.
Although, if I recall, one of the moments where you actually your interest in Bitcoin increased was listening to the Bitcoin Uncensored podcast.
Yeah, that's actually
which is now, it no longer exists, but in its heyday, it was one of the funniest podcasts, second only to Noted. And I had it on while we were folding laundry, and you were cracking up.
I was
and you were
laughing.
like, "What is this? What are we listening to?" And I was like, "It's a Bitcoin podcast." And you were like, "Really? This is a Bitcoin podcast?
Yeah.
It's not putting me to sleep?"
That's true, actually. And I did start listening to that on my own in the car, and I was very, very sad when Chris DeRose and Jen Seth broke up. It affected me for weeks because I didn't have any other Bitcoin podcasts to listen to. That's not the case now, though. There's so many Bitcoin podcasts out there. So maybe just find one that your wife can be interested in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, when it talks about like how to hold your own keys, how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, so that's a more important one, I would say. Obviously, getting your wife on board and then you guys, DCAing together is best case scenario. But assuming that maybe you've already dragged her along and now she doesn't know where your keys are, the first thing is that you should tell her where the keys are. And so sometimes I get on Twitter, no, don't tell your wife where the keys are. She's gonna leave with the keys. And so what I say to that is maybe stop being so married single. Maybe get on the same page about your marriage before you start, not giving away the private key to your wife.
That's deep. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the first step. But really the reality is that you are on the same team. You do need to do this together. If something happens to one spouse or the other, right? Like let's say your wife's the one who's on board and she's dragging her husband along, right? She should let you know where the keys are. And the reason why is, right, something can happen at any time. Hopefully everyone in this room, thank God, will be just fine. But health events come up, people do die, we're all going to die at some point. We should be prepared, and you don't want to be on your deathbed saying the keys are in the safe, the private key, I left it in the garage, and it's you got to dig in the back. You actually have to get a jackhammer. You don't want to be telling her that when you're getting chemo or something, right? So it's worst case scenario, right? Best case scenario is you leave here today and you're like, yeah, now's a good time to talk to my spouse. I'm going to go home and we're going to talk about where the keys are. And we're going to figure this out together. The other thing to consider, though, is that she's probably not as up on the keys as you are. So, like, she might not know what to do or what buttons to push or what a seed card is at all. So you kind of have to go through all of that together, not just, the hardware wallets or, at my mom's house type of a thing. And so maybe doing a small transaction together can help. I think that's also one of the other things that can actually help Orange Pill spouse is doing the transaction together. So, sending 100 sats around on the Lightning Network or doing an on-chain transaction, making sure that your spouse can actually send Bitcoin to one place and then send it back and then send it there again is really important. And I've seen that in my practice time and time again, is that when people actually send and receive transactions, it kind of clicks in their head. Oh, this is something I can actually use. This is not just some, tulip bubble my husband's making me invest in.
Yeah, and I think my pitch to the guys, because the guys are probably thinking like, well, I know what I'm doing. She doesn't need to be involved. She should just trust me. I would say to the guys, when we say don't trust, verify, that includes yourself. Don't trust yourself. So setting up a multisig, something like that, where one of the key signers is your wife, that means that when you're following the wrong Twitter account X account, and they're you're wanting to panic sell because the price went down because CZ looked the other way or something, then you have to go to your wife and you have to tell her, hey, look, I'm following this Twitter account. They told me to sell, and she'll laugh at you, right? And so that way, as a team, you can be holding and not spending your Bitcoin or selling it just because one of you decided to, panic. The other interesting thing about a multi-sig and kind of just having it in cold storage is that you do need both spouses involved to sell, right? To get that signature to move the Bitcoin. But for depositing more Bitcoin, you don't need that, right? You just need the XPub and the addresses. And so that way you're able to accumulate Bitcoin without your wife, needing permission from your wife, right?
the whole reason why people mostly don't want to get their wife on board is because they don't want her to know how much money they're spending on Bitcoin.
It's not spending on Bitcoin. It's how much money they're saving
right.
into Bitcoin for future expenditures.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. But your wife actually can be a good backstop. I think that if you are able to get her on board, right, that she can be your biggest advocate. She can be your helpmate in this to make sure that you stay the course. So there's been actually a lot of research on this, and men are much more likely to trade more consistently than women are. Women who invest and who save in Bitcoin are much more likely to stick to a plan and stay with the plan. So if you tell your wife, we're going to hold this for the next 40 years, she's probably going to hold it for the next 40 years. You know, the husband's more likely to be like, actually, I saw this trend and I was listening to Stock to Flow and the 30-year moving average is underneath the 10-year or whatever. And now we should sell and then buy back. And she's going to say no because she's heard I should hold this for 40 years.
Yeah, and I think this is a gross generalization, but I think that women are more humble than men. Men have bigger egos. They're more arrogant. And so I think women are naturally better Bitcoiners than men are.
We just take more time to get into Bitcoin.
That's right, yeah. Which is totally reasonable, right? Mm-hmm. You gotta make sure that you're not buying Doge or SHIB or something like that. Yeah.
Do we have anything to add there?
Well, what about inheritance and kind of thinking about with the kids, right? That's the next part of the equation is inheritance and estate planning.
Yeah, it's so if you've got kids that are under the age of 18 that are minor children, I mean, like, it's kind of an interesting thing, I think, because in the fiat world, right, kids can't take ownership of funds. And so you have to have all these custodian style accounts where a parent is custody of the funds on behalf of the child. And so in the fiat world, what happens right now is if there's an unfortunate accident for both parents, usually what parents do is they set up something called a testamentary trust, and assets move from the parent's estate into this testamentary trust, which has a trustee for the benefit of their children while they're young. In Bitcoin, you could theoretically, because you don't have to have this third party involved, you could theoretically toss your child a hardware wallet. But I don't know if any of y'all have kids under the age of 18. I don't know necessarily if that's the best idea, right? Just because it's allowed in the Bitcoin world doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it. And so you should, even if you don't want to create a trust on behalf of your children, I advocate for trusts anyways. There are a number of reasons why you would want to have one. Usually it's because of probate. In the state of Texas, there's a private probate process. You don't have to worry about that as much. But in any other state besides here, you basically have to worry about privacy. So you might want to hold your Bitcoin in a trust anyways, given the way that the rules are. And you would want to do it for the benefit of your children. The reason why you would want to involve a trustee rather than just giving it to your brother-in-law for the benefit of your children is that then your brother-in-law can theoretically just run away with the Bitcoin. So there are a lot of rules that are regulations and laws that can actually help protect Bitcoiners. And I think that a lot of the time what we think about in Bitcoin is like, Bitcoin's going to replace all this stuff. I don't need to worry about anything in the fiat world because Bitcoin fixes this and there's too many rules and regulations and none of that makes any sense. And actually there's a lot of them that are great and that can actually help Bitcoiners and that we should be thoroughly up on, especially in trust and estates, to help us plan for the next generation rather than throwing the bathwater out with the baby, or the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. Yeah. Don't
throw the
yeah.
Okay. It's a good thing Jimmy's watching our baby right now.
Yeah. All right. So if let's roll back to the wife who's skeptical.
Yeah.
If you were the husband, what would you tell her?
Well, I would start with asking her what her opinion of Bitcoin is and what her objections are. Because a lot of the time, right, when we're, right, imagine this is wife and this is husband talking, right, and you're talking at her, what happens is that as soon as she responds, it's the other way, right, and she starts talking at you and you're totally closed down and you don't want to hear anything either. And so if you think about a situation where somebody's talking to you but you're not really listening, right, or vice versa, actually is probably a better way to look at it, when you're talking to somebody or your child, right, and your child literally has their ears closed, and we get this from our kids where I'll say, come on kids, we're leaving the house, and our daughter will go, coming, and she'll literally not move, you know? And so you don't want that situation, and you know when it's happening to you. And so your wife knows that she's not being listened to. And so what you want to do is you want to actively listen to her, repeat back what she's saying to show that you're listening, ask good questions about what she's asking about, ask them kindly and with compassion instead of argumentatively because she's not on your side, right? All of these things are good ways to get somebody to come from one side of the table to the other side of the table. So it's just, in the way that you run your relationship normally, you need to use those rules, to apply this to Bitcoin, because it's just a point of disagreement, right? And you have many points of disagreement in your life in a married relationship. And so it's okay to disagree, right? It's how we react to that disagreement that makes or breaks the situation. And so for some couples, that's going to mean starting more slowly in Bitcoin. And maybe, if you think the world is ending tomorrow and you want to have 100% of your assets in Bitcoin rather than fiat, your wife's not moving fast enough for you. But inevitably what can happen, right, is like you can lose your spouse over something like this, right? So you kind of have to weigh up what's more important to you. And I would say 100% of the time, right, you love your spouse, you're on the same team, you want to be on the same page. So in doing that, I think listening is really the first step, hearing her concerns, really hearing them and addressing them in a compassionate way.
That's great advice. And then for the single Bitcoiners, they're in a tough situation of how do I, avoid a bit digger, and it's kind of the opposite problem.
Yeah. Well, maybe don't talk about Bitcoin so much on the first date. That's usually
I did not follow that advice.
It's usually
at the time you were skeptical.
Yeah.
So
I was skeptical at the time, yeah, and I did ask a lot of questions. That's fair. Yeah, I mean, right, you have to find somebody you have common interests with that you could envision yourself living a long life with and so forth. And so you want to pull money out of the equation. And you would want to do that anyways, right? If you were just a wealthy person from fiat, you wouldn't want that to, muck around anything in the relationship. So I would say just focusing on what values you share is going to be more important than, dangling the fact that you own a bunch of Bitcoin and you're going to buy a Lambo in 20 years.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I think a lot of Bitcoiners, or not a lot, some Bitcoiners are broke. They just like to talk about Bitcoin. So just because they're talking about Bitcoin doesn't mean they're sitting on a Michael Saylor, treasure trove.
Yeah, that's fair. But I think especially if you're in that situation, you should maybe focus less on Bitcoin, right? And that way she doesn't think that she's bit digging and then get surprised later that she didn't, hit the bit digging jackpot and then leave.
In divorce.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Maybe just, I say again, focus on shared values, right?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Is there maybe we could take some audience questions on this topic. Anyone out in the audience?
We've got a yellow shirt over here.
Thank you. I feel like that was an Unchained infomercial rather than a question, but yeah,
Do you work at Unchained?
yeah. How much did they pay you
to ask?
No, that's good. No,
we like
Unchained is. I think that it's a user-friendly way to have what we were talking about of having everyone kind of onboarded, and they even have like concierge handholding so that maybe the husband has listened to lots of Michael Saylor podcasts but doesn't actually know how to use Bitcoin. And Unchained is a great way to onboard him onto Bitcoin, with his wife and kids.
Yeah, I would say too, especially for most people don't feel very confident holding 3 out of 3 keys, right? You have to find a lot of places to hold 3 out of 3. So collaborative custody is really great in the regard that as long as you don't lose one, you have somebody else to help you sign, which is really nice, and can give a spouse, I would say, a lot of comfort, especially if she's not as up on what to do with Bitcoin as you are.
All right, we still have time for. Oh yeah, we got a question there. Wow, is the whole Unchained sales team here?
Yeah.
Is there? Raise your hand if you're not with Unchained.
We should talk to Drew about how we should get some stock for this pitch we just did.
Yeah, we'll get some advisor shares maybe. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is how to kind of onboard friends and family, into holding their own keys with something like a seed signer or hardware wallet or a or signature signing device, right? I think that's the good name for it. But I would actually argue that to motivate them to get through that process, you should start with a mobile wallet, something really easy, maybe like even a Lightning mobile wallet like Phoenix, and have them send money around, sats around like that, where it kind of has that magic internet money moment of, oh, wow, this is really, interesting and I want to learn more about it, rather than jumping into the deep end of setting up a multi-sig. And so that way they're kind of just, going through the learning curve.
Yeah, for sure. There's also, I mean, there are other, besides Unchained Capital, obviously, there are open source multi-sig solutions that can help somebody get set up. Obviously, it's more complicated than just open an account at Unchained type of a thing, and so it'll take more training for sure. But I would say I wouldn't do it all at once. The problem with doing it all at once is everyone in the room feels like they're experts, especially if they do it for an hour or whatever, and then they don't look at it ever again. And then when the time comes and they actually have to use Bitcoin, it's so far in the back of their brain that they can't actually do it. And even if they've taken notes along the way, we've found that clients still have trouble looking back at their notes and knowing what to do. And so actual regular usage is really more important, especially for people who aren't in it all the time. I would say like at least once a year, spending 10, 15 minutes.
No, you need to be training weekly with your family. Okay. Every Thursday evening you have seed signer night, and
I think that could be like the new family meeting. You just use your hardware wallets every Thursday night, and then you play like Uno afterwards.
No, you do some code reviews on Bitcoin Core afterwards.
Oh, yeah,
as a family together.
How could I have gotten that wrong?
Yeah. So the question is, if your family is, happy enough with it that you bought it, but they're not interested in actually learning more about it, and the idea of them receiving it is basically like they would immediately convert it into fiat and go buy a Lambo, right? So that
if they could figure out how to convert it.
Right. Yeah, that's their motivation. It's like,
them. Just kidding.
Hey, when I get hit by a bus, do you want to be able to spend this money? And so that way they'll learn about Bitcoin. But do you have a more serious answer?
I mean, the more serious answer is really it's long involved discussions, unfortunately, about why they don't want to get involved, and it's kind of similar to how you would orange for your spouse, in which you have to listen to their concerns about it. I would say that like probably uninterested children is going to be a little more difficult because they don't think that their parents know anything, and they're like, this old fogey wants me to do Bitcoin stuff, whatever. But at least getting your wife on board, I would say, even if she doesn't really care what you're doing and she doesn't really want to be involved, just having regular discussions about her concerns about it. I mean, sometimes it's I'm just totally disinterested, but other times there's actually a real fear there that she doesn't actually think she can do it. And for whatever reason, it just feels too technologically beyond her. And so I think also starting with what you said with the Lightning wallet to show how easy it is, and then easing into some of, you know, the more difficult aspects of Bitcoin to use is the way to go there. And that way you could just slowly get them into it. But unfortunately, yeah, it does take discussions, and it might be years of discussions before you actually are able to get a family member interested in doing it the way you're doing it.
What if your wife gets too interested and becomes a crypto degen?
I've actually never had that in my practice. That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, I guess it could happen. I mean, I've had the opposite where the wife's like, you know, my husband won't stop being a degenerate gambler in crypto. I think actually that's the perfect time to hire an advisor. And I would actually even say for your question, hiring an advisor might help too, because if they hear it from somebody else that they trust, it might be a good way to get other family members involved. That's one way of thinking about it. If your spouse has become a, you know, crypto degen, then it does help to have a third party who's uninterested, who, you know, can be objective about the situation, take the reins and pull it back. In the situation that I'm talking about, the wife was really concerned about all of the S-coining her husband was doing. And so she literally just asked me point blank in a meeting, like, why are you Bitcoin only and why is my husband not Bitcoin only? And so very respectfully, I had to lay out the case of why I was Bitcoin only and why we don't mess around with these other coins. But I think that obviously I don't know what exactly happened to them after the meeting, but and what they talked about.
Rehab.
But yeah.
Yeah.
But she felt really confident that we're working together, right? And it's going to keep her husband from really doing too much damage to their financial situation. And so I would say in that regard, if you can't pull them back from the brink, what you need to do is just set aside a bunch of money that's like hobby money, gambling, degen money, right? And you just let them go.
You
with
said
that.
Set aside a bunch of.
No. I meant like very small, like less than 1% of net worth money that, you know, that degenerate gambler in your family can play with and lose. And then they will lose it, right? Inevitably. So if you're okay with, you know, them losing $1,000, then, you know, it's sometimes you just have to learn the hard way.
Yep. So I've kind of sharpened my wife now where when there's a price drop, I like run in the kitchen jokingly and tell her, and she's like, that means you can buy more, right? So we're in a good place, but we do the kind of monthly, like seed training, like transfer transactions and all that shit was there, but it was only whenever I lost my ledger, I had to figure out the derivation path thing and went through that kind of like sweaty process. What other challenges are there beyond the derivation path where if I'm gone and she has to recover, let's say she lost the devices, but she has the seeds, is there anything else beyond the derivation path she would have to figure out that I need to make sure she knows about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for example, with Unchained, they have a tool called Caravan that allows you to recover the Bitcoin independently of the company, and that I think bundles, you know, the right set of information to be able to recover. But there's also, you know, the derivation path part. There's metadata that essentially they need to have to be able to recover. And I think that, you know, that's part of the value of using a third party like Unchained to help with those technical things. Ideally, the software would just be able to handle it, you know, for you and kind of brute force the path and figure everything out. And I think Blue Wallet has done a lot of that work of, hey, put in any seed and we'll figure it out for you. So, you know, ideally that would be on the software side, but I'm speaking as a product manager, not as a husband. Yeah, so you have to know elliptic curve multiplication. So, you know, you know, you can go to any degree of peeling the onion back on that.
Yeah, okay, taxes and record keeping. So I know everybody here thinks that the IRS is going to be abolished in 3 years after the halving, so none of this will apply, right? No, I'm just kidding. So you have to live in reality, unfortunately. So even if the IRS is abolished in 5 to 10 years, it's not abolished now, in which case record keeping, I think, is really important. You should know your basis, which is literally how much fiat you put in to buy Bitcoin. You should at least have an average price about it. There's something called specific lots. So it's literally the price at which you bought Bitcoin. You can assign it to that specific batch of Bitcoin that you purchased. And the reason why you would want to actually do specific lot over just an average price is because you could do tax loss harvesting. So in a situation where you bought at 69,000, you would be able to sell it today and take that tax loss and buy back and be able to actually claim that on your tax return. And so, obviously you want to buy back so that you're still holding Bitcoin, but it's just something that you can deduct $3,000 a year for doing so. So there's certain advantages to record keeping. There's another thing that you would want to do is that you get a step up in basis when you pass away and you pass your Bitcoin on. And so obviously your basis today wouldn't matter if you're just waiting for that event to happen, but your family at that point would want to record what the price was on your date of death so that they knew what their basis was, so that way they got that step up. And that assumes obviously that you take everything through the proper channels and through the courts. If you just, tell your wife that your kids that your hardware wallet's buried in some forest somewhere and you don't want to bring it back into the system, then they're not going to get that step up in basis. But there probably will be questions under the current system of if they're trying to bring that Bitcoin back into the fiat system, where they got that money. So I would say, in the world that we live in and in the reality that we currently are in, you should be up on the rules and what you need to do, and definitely keep track do good record keeping.
I think that they could say they found the Bitcoin while snorkeling. Somebody must have lost it during a boating accident. And so I don't know what the rules are when you just find value. Does the IRS tax that? Might be a question for a tax lawyer.
Yeah, that might be a question for a tax lawyer. I mean, I think that there would probably be questions if it was shortly after a known family member who was active in the Bitcoin community passed away. It's like the IRS, they're not that dumb. They know some things. They know.
I heard some boos.
Yeah, I agree. Boo.
All right, I think that we're over time, so we'll let you all get to your break. Thanks for coming out to BitBlockBoom, and thank you to Gary Leland for organizing and all of the people who are helping with the conference.
Grandpa, why do you have so much Bitcoin?
Well, it all started in the year 2023 when I attended a conference called BitBlockBoom.
What's BitBlockBoom, Grandpa?
It was a conference where people talked about Bitcoin. This was way back when we used something called the US dollar for money.
What? Bitcoin wasn't always the world's money?
If it weren't for great speakers at BitBlockBoom like Jimmy Song, Adam Curry, and Preston Pish, we'd all be living in pods and eating bugs. Instead, I was able to avoid fiat enslavement and secure generational wealth.
F***ing legend.
Be the legend your grandchildren deserve. Experience the best Bitcoin conference out there and join the Bitcoin revolution. BitBlockBoom, the only conference for true Bitcoin maximalists. Book your tickets today at bitblockboom.com and use the code BBB1 for a special discount.